You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode number 53. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. Paula here. So excited to have you back. Thanks for joining. I think you're going to love today's episode. It's an interview with Annette Choti, who is a lawyer and digital marketing expert. And Annette is going to share with us her story of transitioning from lawyer with a side hustle to pursuing that side hustle full time. And you're going to love hearing about how she did that. And you're also going to love hearing about what it is that she loves about marketing and her views on marketing and how that might impact on how you view marketing in your own practice. So without further ado, I'm going to dive into that interview. Thanks again for joining us this week. I hope you love today's episode, and I'm excited to reconnect with all of you next week. Bye for now. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the podcast. I'm so excited to be introducing you to this week's guest. Her name is Annette Choti, and Annette is a lawyer. She is also the founder of Law Quill, which is a company through which she does digital marketing for lawyers. She is also a podcaster. You may have heard Annette on her podcast, Legal Marketing Lounge. And she's an author and a speaker, and we're just so happy to have her here this week. Annette, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, it's such an honor to have you. And for those of you who don't know you, Annette, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do through Law Quill?
Sure. So I am an attorney of 20 years, United States, and attorney. And I worked for the federal government for almost 2 decades. And then I pivoted because that was enough of that. And I decided to start after I started working in digital marketing. I worked for very large digital marketing agencies for law firms. And then I really decided that smaller law firms, mid-sized, smaller, and solo law firms didn't have as much of an opportunity to grow online because the larger digital marketing agencies simply were not providing them services that they could afford. So then I created Law Quill in order to be able to do that.
Beautiful. And if we go back a little bit into the 20 years, right? It's like in conversation, I spent 20 years practicing law. And then what exactly were you doing during those 20 years?
That's a great question. I actually worked as an investigator for the U.S. Department of Labor. So a lot of ERISA work, retirement plans, health plans, retirement employee benefit plans. I worked with all of those within an investigative capacity. And I worked with our civil and criminal attorney teams when necessary to, first of all, help people be compliant with those laws administratively. And then if they had, violated any law, civil or criminal, then we would move forward with that as well. So that was what I did for the Department of Labor for 2 decades.
Amazing. And I understand, I've listened to some of your podcast episodes. I've listened to you speak, and it seems like you really loved what you were doing. And then it reached a point where you found this other passion, this digital marketing. And it's such an interesting story. And I would love to hear how you made that transition from practicing law to doing more of the marketing piece of it.
So, I wasn't actually practicing law. So I was actually working, I was using my, obviously, legal knowledge within the context of investigations at the U.S. Department of Labor. But over time, I felt a little overlooked in that capacity. I didn't feel like I had been given as many opportunities as I had wanted that I had been reaching for. There are sort of cultural, I guess, reasons behind that. And I was very frustrated with sort of the landlocked position and the non-ability for me to move forward or upward. So it had been several years that I had been frustrated with that. And I didn't really want to start out put out my own shingle and start a law firm. I didn't really know how to do that, frankly, in my mid 40s. And I really didn't know what to do. And there was another attorney that I'm friends with, and she casually mentioned in conversation one time, why don't you just write blogs for law firms? Why don't you do something, because you love to write and all that. And I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, well, it's like SEO. And I remember when I went to the internet and looked up SEO because I had no idea what it was. I was like, well, this sounds kind of interesting. And I started learning about it. And then that was it, Paula. I was completely hooked. I absolutely loved it. There's a bit of a gamification to it. Like, there's winners, there's losers. And I'm type A personality. I'm an attorney. I like to win. So the gamification of digital marketing was really the whole idea of it. The fact that it's a little bit of a science with the data. And then it's also a bit of an art form because you have to be, writing and creating content that is for real life human beings and bots. It's just the whole construct of it I loved. So I started doing that on the side and I got that approved by the ethics committee. So it was all legal on the up and up that I was able to do that. And the more and more I did it, I was then eventually working 2 full-time jobs because I loved doing it so much. And then I completely switched and I left the Department of Labor. I started doing that just on my own. And I worked for a lot of different, very large legal marketing agencies. And I became frustrated with all of them because I felt like some of their tactics were a little bit shady. And of course, an average law firm is not going to know that because they don't really disclose or sort of demystify the entire SEO process. And the long story short is I just really decided that I wanted to provide a lot of value and information and education regarding digital marketing for small, solo, and mid-sized law firms that were not being captured and educated by these larger digital marketing agencies. So that was my progression over, from a government employee to founding and owning my own digital marketing agency.
I love it. It's such a great story. And I can tell as you started talking about the SEO and the bots and the marketing that it's something that really lights you up, that you're really passionate about. And it was a transition for you, right? It sounds like it started out as the side hustle. You got clearance to do it. You started doing it. And then you did more and more of that until it became the main hustle. And one of the things that comes up for me in conversations I have with lawyers, they reach out to me. They are kind of maybe where you were at, right? After 20 years of practice, they were just finding that they are at a transition point, but they don't necessarily know what that next step is going to be. They haven't really explored options outside of the role that they have been in. And so for you, it was a suggestion by a friend to maybe start writing blogs. And this kind of led from one thing to the next. And so a question I have for you, which I think a lot of people will be able to relate to, is when did you go to turn the side hustle, right? This passion project almost that you had on the side of your desk. How did you know when it was time to leave the law, to leave that sort of steady government job and make that transition into your hustle, right?
I am not a risk taker, Paula.
Most of us aren't, especially lawyers, where you've got laws and rules to follow. And so this is the challenge.
I'm a rule follower, and I was a government employee for 2 decades. So to say that I was risk averse is to put it very mildly. So when all of this was happening several years ago, I got remarried, and my husband is absolutely incredible. And so he knew I was completely just miserable at my job. Emotionally, even academically, I wasn't learning anything new, which I love to do. Creatively, professionally, like all of those adverbs. I was not happy. And so when I found this, I had started to build this on the side. And at one point I loved it so much. I was literally working 40 hours a week. And then I was working 30 to 40 hours a week at home when I would get home on this. And he was like, you have got to quit. And I was like, I don't want to quit because what if? But I was clearly making enough just doing freelancing work at that time. I mean, this was in the infancy. Law Quill was not even an idea yet. And he was like, listen, the amount of money that you're making is far surpassing what you're making at the Department of Labor. We will be fine, and just do it. And it was so difficult. I mean, so many mornings I was with a cup of coffee and a spreadsheet going, can I really do it? Can I really do it? I don't know if I can do it. Maybe I'll wait another year. And it just finally, my husband gave me the analogy. If you've ever seen Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, when he gets, and maybe I'm just dating myself with this, but there's this part where he knows he has to step off of a cliff and there's no bridge there, he thinks. And he just puts his hand on his heart and trusts God because, the message is from God, the Temple of Doom, whatever. And he literally just clutches his heart and takes that leap of faith and steps. And there is a bridge there that catches him. And I always have that image of me just saying, that is there, you will be fine. And then after I did that, it was not long after I had left the Department of Labor that I realized that there was such exponential growth and potential for me to really help small and solo and mid-sized law firms, that I was like, this was the best decision I ever made. But it was a very calculated risk. It was not just jumping blind into anything. So.
Yeah. Annette, everything you've just said, like I literally have goosebumps. I think it's such a magical story. I love that idea of just stepping off the cliff, because that's kind of what it feels like, right? When you go from the safe lockstep, everything is there, to doing something completely different. There's that moment of, it's like your heart's in your throat, right? You feel like you're stepping off a cliff and you don't know whether that bridge is going to be waiting for you or not. And so I think it's so interesting. And there are a couple other things you said. You talked about all the adverbs. Can I just point that out and say that's really funny and like so apt? Because I think that's really how so many of us find ourselves at that point of wanting to make a transition, right? We feel like this is not for us and we're not, I can't remember the exact adverbs that you were using, but it's that feeling. And sometimes it takes somebody else looking at us and mirroring that back to us. And when you were talking about your husband, and, before you got to the spreadsheets, it reminded me of my own husband. And when I started my coach training, I was spending a lot of time on my laptop at the kitchen table. And I would be in my coaching class, smiling at my computer, typing away on my assignment. And he's like, I've never seen you smile like this at your computer before. And I was like, oh, really? Like, I didn't even know I was smiling. He's like, no, you're smiling. And sometimes you need that external input to realize where maybe things aren't great, right? Like you kind of take it and grin and bear it, thinking this is the right path. But when somebody else can actually step in and say, well, what else, right? Like you just don't seem happy. Is there something else? So I just love that story, and how sometimes it's the people that are closest to you who are able to point that out, and that gets you moving. And I love that you had a spreadsheet and you were all ready.
There were, and I don't know how many times I redid that spreadsheet. I mean, it must have been hundreds, literally. But my husband, I had just told him, I said, I'm just not happy sitting in this beige cubicle, in this beige office, in this beige world of just mediocrity, where I'm not getting to do anything that really makes a difference. And while I may not have my own law firm, there are a lot of law firms that I work with that are my clients that are making a real difference in the world. And the fact that I can get their stories out there to more people, so more people can get that help, it fires me up.
Totally. And Annette, we've talked a little bit about like the spreadsheet, right? Like, can I make this work? That side of the transition. And I think another element I'd love to explore is what else is going on. So as a lawyer, there's a certain role that you play in society. It's very easy to define. I mean, I don't know if people probably know now more what digital marketing means, but not always. I'd love to know what some of the questions were that you were asking yourself when you were about to make that leap, as to the questions that you were asking and answering for yourself before you made that transition.
For me, it was never about how I appeared in like, I don't really care what others think of me. I have done theater and comedy, and so I'm not afraid to just be who I am. I'm Christian. I'm just kind of who I am. I find my worth in God. So that wasn't an issue for me. But what was an issue for me were the real fundamental questions of like where the rubber hits the road. What do we do for health insurance? What are we going to do for life insurance? Like, can I transition that over? What are we going to do about the fact that you do have to wait a certain amount of time in the United States to even qualify for certain unemployment insurances if, your business goes bad. Like for me, it was a lot of rubber hits the road. What are we going to do? And then, all the contingency plans. Well, if this happens, then this happens. And I am guilty of kind of the idol, frankly, of self-sufficiency, that I try to think of every possible scenario and I try to think of every possible outcome, knowing full well that there are a lot of scenarios I can't even think of or plan for or prepare for or be ready for. But, I think as attorneys, especially, we do try to plan. We're all type A personalities, right? And so not all of us, but a lot of us. And so we all try to, mitigate any kind of risk that we might have in a certain area. But I finally got to where I was personally comfortable with certain acceptable levels of risk and unsurety regarding taking that leap. And then that was when, I closed out the spreadsheet and I wrote my resignation letter instead.
Beautiful. And I think it's really wonderful that you've highlighted the risk analysis, because I think for a lot of lawyers who are thinking about making a transition, that's kind of number one sometimes, right? I'm used to receiving a certain level of income, and our family is set up based on that level of income, and there's security in that. And so if you're thinking about doing something, it doesn't even necessarily mean leaving law or starting your own business. It means sitting down and evaluating what you've described, right? The practical realities of insurance. Who's going to pay for the medical insurance? How am I going to do the life insurance? All the kind of pieces we don't really want to think about on a day-to-day, but that once you have those in place, that gives you the freedom, I imagine, to then step forward and get into that more creative zone of, okay, now I'm going to build. Like, I'm going to build this, and I know that I have got myself covered in all these different scenarios.
I think that when someone is trying to make the transition, I think it's different. Risk levels are different for every person, obviously. But I think when you're trying to evaluate whether or not you should take that risk, I think that the thing that benefited me the most was there was no guesswork that I knew that I was able to write. It all started with content, that I would write search engine optimized content for law firms, for these digital marketing agencies. And then I learned how to do social media. Then I learned how to schedule it. Then I learned hashtag research. Then, I was learning. And I realized as the more that I learned, I loved it. It was so fun. So if someone is in a particular, like a big law practice, or if they are in-house counsel or whatever they are doing, my best suggestion is to, if it's possible at all, try to do something else on the side first for a while to see if you even like it, or at least if you can't do it, because sometimes we can't, right? Like sometimes if you are part of big law, you are not able to go do something else within their non-compete clauses or whatever you've got going on, is to talk to as many people that are doing what you want to do for a while, not, because don't be impulsive about it. And I know that kind of goes against the grain of what some coaches or, business strategists would say. But I think that the more comfortable you are with making your decision once you make it, there's already so much anxiety about it that if you can just mitigate some of the parts that are scary, then that can help you feel more comfortable when you do finally take that leap into something completely different, or at least law adjacent.
Yeah, I think that's such sound advice, and absolutely warming yourself up to that. And something you said there too really struck me, which is that once you stepped into your new role, that it was like this whole other world opened up, right? You had the list of like, okay, it went from writing content to the SEO, to the hashtags, to the digital marketing, like, or the social media, sorry. It's like, once you step in, there's so much more to learn, and there's so many places where you can continue to grow. And that's what I think is really interesting. And you only learn that through actually putting your feet in and doing that work and learning and seeing how much more opportunity really exists there, right? I mean, your initial step was the writing of the content and then working for other organizations. And then you saw that here's an area, the small solo firms, where there's a need, and I'm the right person to start helping this particular group of lawyers and law firms. So, but you wouldn't necessarily have seen that after writing your first blog article. So
no,
it really is a process.
No, it is a process. And I realized, as I had started Law Quill, before I even started, I knew a lot of small or solo law firms would not be able to afford any digital marketing at all. They just didn't have the budget for it. And I made it my mission. It's a pillar of Law Quill education, and to demystify the entire digital marketing process. And that's the reason, as we visited before, I have over 150 blog posts on my website for free. I have, a podcast now, which is so fun. And I get to give information and demystify SEO there as well for lawyers. And then as I started putting together things over the years, I realized, maybe I should put this all into a book. And it was just an idea. And then the very long and short of it was, I saw the books that were out there, and I'm sure your audience will know what those are. There's very few. And every one of them seems to be a bit of a sales funnel to just hire the digital marketing agency that wrote it. And so I said, well, I want really, truly an ultimate guide that will help law firms. And so that is what I did. I created a guide for that. So
I love that. And I can see those listening, you don't have the benefit of seeing Annette. I do. And there's a click magnet book behind her. Annette is sending me a copy, which I'm so excited about. Thank you, Annette. And I think maybe what we'll do is we'll chat a little bit more. We'll link to that in the show notes, because those of you who are out there wanting to know, I would love to have you able to access it. So we'll do that. But before we get there, I just wanted to have a little bit more of a chat about Annette's transition, because to me, this is one of the most, I love this part of her story. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about the SEO and the work that she's doing, the actual writing of it. So before we get there, just a couple more questions, Annette. And one of them is, when you were making that transition, what were some of the things that you found challenging? So you had the spreadsheet, you wrote the resignation letter, and then you're about to set up Law Quill, or maybe we didn't know yet that's what was coming. But what was challenging about making that transition for you?
I think, other than everything I've already said, it was the fact that my friends and family, other than my, very, very close friends and my husband, they did not understand what I was doing. They could not wrap their head around the fact that I would have a 20-year, I don't know how many years it was. I think it was like 4 or 5 years. I could have retired, with a pen. I mean, I still have a pension, but a better pension, right? And that I could just ride it out. I could just ride out this gig with the Department of Labor. And why, in your mid 40s, are you completely pivoting to a completely different career choice that is entrepreneurial? Why would you do this? And I think that was a challenge as well, to try to not feel defensive when people are like, well, I don't get why you're doing this. And it's hard to explain, in an elevator pitch, why you are transitioning your entire life, but that it's the right decision. It was the right decision. The people at work certainly did not understand it. And I think, frankly, felt a little bitter that I was leaving. They couldn't quite understand it because once you've stayed with the government that long, you're really not expected to leave. So I was going against the grain with a lot with my colleagues at work, with some friends who didn't understand, who still don't understand, frankly, family that did not understand, and thought I just needed to put my head down in my beige cubicle and just put the rest of my time in and kind of be quiet about it. And that was emotionally difficult for me. So I'm very glad I had a really good supportive system of some people who did understand. So that was really, I would say that is really important as well. If you are going to make any kind of a transition, just make sure that you've got a really good support system, because pivoting, especially later in life and pivoting to something completely new, there can be some turbulence in that. And so it's really great to have a good support system.
I totally agree with that. And I resonate with that description of trying to find people who understand what you're doing. Because sometimes you're just getting it clear in your own mind. And sometimes you have to protect your own mind a little bit while you yourself, I mean, this is me speaking about me more than I don't know if this is your experience, but I found there was definitely that period of having to really think it through for myself and get comfortable with what I was doing, because it can be a big transition. It can be quite different from what you're doing before. And so from the outside looking in, it may not make as much sense as it does to the person who's in it, if that makes sense, which I'm not sure I am making any sense.
I agree with that. And I'll say that, frankly, some of my most challenging times, because there are challenging times as an entrepreneur. So during my most challenging times, I often found, other than my husband, who's amazing, and my daughter, online communities actually filled with female founders, or not just female founders, but also like male and female, both entrepreneurial groups, people that can immediately resonate and understand and nod their head and say, I get you, I'm with you. Either I'm in it with you right now, or I was just recently there. So yeah. I feel you.
Totally. And I am nodding my head as we're talking, and similarly find reaching out and becoming part of certain communities online, in person, whatever it looks like, with like-minded entrepreneurs or people who are doing similar things. And it just helps you feel like you're part of a community. It may be a community of solopreneurs, but you're within a community. What would you recommend? So for lawyers who are thinking about leaving their, and you've already shared a lot, so I'm not sure, you may have something to add here, but what advice you might give lawyers who are thinking about leaving their jobs as lawyers or doing something traditional to do something different?
I think it's really important to figure out whether or not what you want to do is another career choice, or whether or not it's something that could fulfill you perhaps as a hobby. So for a while, I was very interested in doing some other very artistic. I do theater, musical theater, and I used to do professional comedy. So those were things that I was very interested in doing, but that was not bringing me out. It wasn't enough for the fact that I was still going to work 40 hours a week, in my beige cubicle. But I think that if you are truly going to turn your entire career or your professional life on its head, that maybe a first step is to figure out whether or not there's something that you can do on the side that would bring you as much joy as complete upheaval of your professional life. In my case, the answer was no. I needed to do this in order to be completely happy. Although I will say I was very blessed to have a job at the Department of Labor for 2 decades. It's a great job. It's full of benefits. I was able to not have to work 80 hours a week. So I was always there for everything for my daughter. So I don't want to disparage that. I was just not completely fulfilled professionally. So I do think that one thing that I hadn't mentioned was, perhaps there's something else that you can do. Maybe it's pro bono work. Maybe it's working on the side with different charities. Maybe there's something else that you can do that will relieve that feeling of frustration professionally. But then if you get to a point where it doesn't, then that might be the time to go a little more nuclear on it and say, no, I think I have to change. I'm really ready to make a more definitive and holistic change.
Yeah. And I'm so glad you shared that, because I think that's really where a lot of professionals, lawyers in particular, are finding themselves at that crossroads, right? They feel unfulfilled potentially in their work. They've started or they have other interests that they're looking to for fulfillment outside of work. And then how you described it, I think, is really helpful, because it's, and I like how you described going nuclear, because it can kind of feel like that. But for some people, they may be able to find the balance of fulfillment by supplementing what they're doing. Whereas for others, that will not be enough. They're going to need to do something that deals with, or that alters perhaps quite dramatically, the main hustle, we can call it, in exchange for something else. Annette, you mentioned earlier that one of the driving values in your organization is education. I'd love to know how your values have helped you shape the career choices that you've made.
I really believe that we are on this planet to try to make it a better place. So whatever you need to do in order to make that happen. And that's a little woo-woo, and I get that. But I really felt like if I'm going to make this transition and I'm going to do it to fulfill my own personal and professional goals, that I can do that while also helping other people achieve their personal and professional goals. And I realized that, listen, I know for a fact that I can help law firms grow online. I know that I can do that. The problem is that some of the smaller or solo law firms simply do not have a digital marketing budget that is capable of sustaining anything, right? Like their marketing budget is zero. So I felt like one of the things that was happening when I was working for very large digital marketing agencies was that they were letting a complete segment of the law firm population they just completely ignored that population. They want the law firms that have, 50 plus lawyers that have, multiple locations, worldwide locations. And I really felt like the law firms in the United States and Canada, that's mostly what I work with, is the United States and Canada. Although I do overseas as well, but this is the primary, is that smaller and solo law firms have such a challenge because they want to grow. It's like, right? It's like the chicken and the egg. What do you do first? You want to grow, but to grow, you have to market, but then you can't market because you don't have the money because you're still small. It's just this sort of cyclical thing. And I thought I can break that cycle by providing law firms with free information or very inexpensive information to at least get some traction in one or two of the digital marketing areas so that they can start growing, so that they can get more clients, so that they can have more money. And then they can start outsourcing all of the things that are not within their zone of genius, that are not within what they want to do, which is practice the law and help people. So, I have like 150 articles on my website that's free. And I've got a podcast that's free and a book that's, not that expensive. And then I'm always available on LinkedIn for people who have just quick questions to ask me. And I think that is something that I did not see in the larger digital marketing agencies. They were like, oh, well, you don't have 10 grand to spend a month. Well, then, there's the door. And the other thing that I did was also make sure that lawyers would be educated enough to know what services they were ready for, what they were not ready for, and then they could make educated, smart decisions regarding whatever digital marketing dollars that they had. And that was whether they hired me or somebody else, that they would be able to take that information and say, okay, now I have enough knowledge to know whether or not I'm getting my money's worth from a digital marketing agency or, how to do this myself. And for me, that was really important to empower small law firms, because I am also a small business and I know how that struggle is to try to succeed. And I want that for them so badly. So it was just a fundamental piece of creating my business, along with being completely transparent about prices, about not having packages that you have to be forced into. Everything that we do is bespoke. So from start to finish, I wanted to be the digital marketing agency that helped you before you could afford me, and then slowly grew with you until you become maybe someone with 5, 10, multiple, lawyers, multiple locations. That was my goal, not just to forget about you until you have 50 lawyers and 10 locations.
Yeah, I think what you've described is so key, and it's something that resonates with me as well in terms of my practice and the work that I do, which is here's information that can really help you, and there are ways of gaining access to that information, or in your case, and my case too, there are services that require a certain threshold of investment, but to be able to share that information and, as you said, empower your clients, like empower lawyers and law firms to, number one, have access to the information so that they can do it themselves to some extent, and also to know that if and when they're ready to bring on someone to help them with their digital marketing, for example, that they know what they're looking for, that they understand how it fits into their overall strategy. Because really, as lawyers, I mean, I love the digital space, but I don't know how many lawyers are wanting to make that, what percentage of their practice they're wanting to spend doing their marketing. My guess is their marketing is a way of bringing themselves into connection with their clients who they want to help in their capacity as lawyers. And so being able to have enough information to make good decisions, I think, is in itself such a valuable service to be providing. So that just really resonates with me. So thank you. In terms of the digital marketing and talking about, how it went from the side hustle to your main hustle or practice, what was it that you loved about it? I mean, it sounds like you kind of took on a content writing assignment and it really just grew from there. What was it, and what is it that you love about your work?
I like to win. I am an attorney and I am competitive at heart. And I am also creative. Like I said, I did theater, I write, I, was a comedian. I don't know, some people would say I'm still a comedian. So digital marketing for law firms allowed me to do all of that. It allowed me to be creative. We do branding. How creative is that? How fun is that? We do websites for people now. We do their complete websites or refreshes. How creative is that? How fun is that? And then we do the content, which is obviously create a little bit of creativity, but then also it's formulaic as well. I won't lie that there's a certain formula that the Google bots love. They're not our robot overlords yet. We have to explain to them, what this content is about. Social media is incredibly informative and educational, but also creative, right? Backlink strategy, all of these things combine all of that together. And then it puts it into an ecosystem where there are winners and there are losers. And I love it when I can get a law firm that is a small practice to be on the first page ahead of these huge law firms. It is such an amazing feeling when I get lawyers, my clients will tell me, oh, we're on the first page of Google, or, oh, now, we have a lot of clients that are coming in. They saw the last blog post, whatever it is. And every time that's happening, it's like an adrenaline rush, right? We're winning. I'm winning for them. And then that's just cyclical. I just want to do it again and again and again, because it's so much fun. And I feel like it's so creative, but then also there are statistics and data to show you that your creativity is winning. So and then I'm getting to do that for a lot of law firms that are incredibly important. I work for everything from in Canada and the United States, everything from, personal injury, of course, criminal, of course, help defending people's rights. I work with special education attorneys. I work with employment attorneys that help people who have been harassed or discriminated against. I work with so many law firms that are so dedicated to helping people and their lives be better and to get justice. And so for me, that just fuels the fire to do even more to get them even more online visibility, to make their digital footprint bigger so that they can win. Because at the end of the day, nothing matters except more clients, right? I mean, that's the point of all of this. And so I just like helping law firms. I just like being the assist, right? Like I'm on the court, I'm the assist, and then they get to make, the basket, the touchdown, whatever sports analogy, whatever kind of sport you like. I'm just the assist in that. And then they get to make the slam dunk by getting the client. I just love it. I just love my role in that.
I love that. That's so great. When you're thinking about marketing, what elements do you think are most important for lawyers?
So lawyers, they are no different than any other business online, except for, I will put a footnote that Google wants lawyers and other professional organizations to have a strong EAT score. EAT is expertise, authority, and trustworthiness. That means the stuff that goes on your website has to be linked, outgoing links and ingoing links to authoritative sources, .org, .gov sites, things like that. It needs to showcase a strong keyword strategy that showcases that you know what you're talking about in the area of law that you're talking about. Ultimately, that is because, here's another acronym, YMYL. It's the practice of law or accounting or being a medical professional is your money or your life. So Google holds law firms, chiropractic offices, medical facilities, tax accountants, CPAs, all to a higher level and standard because people are going to rely on the information on that website to make decisions about their money or their life. But other than that, that just means that you're held to a higher standard. So there is a very formulaic strategy that every law firm needs to follow in order to grow online. We talked earlier, Paula, that, a lot of times when lawyers come to me, they have a little bit of PTSD from dealing with other digital marketing agencies. That's okay. We can work with that. I understand. And then the other part is they don't know where to start first. Am I supposed to be on TikTok? Am I supposed to be on Clubhouse? What do I do? And this is the very easy roadmap. And I talk about it in my book as well, which is that first you need branding. How are you different than other law firms? And that can be not just a logo, but it can be a tagline. It can be colors. I know you're the best. Like, I get it. Whoever's listening right now, you are the best lawyer ever. I know it. But nobody else knows it. And you can't just have a gavel and the navy blue color. You've got to do something different. So your branding, your tagline, what's setting you apart, then it's your website. That's your real estate on the internet. Instead of people being distracted by cat videos or whatever on Facebook, they are on your website. So put really good stuff on there and make it easy to navigate, make it visually appealing, and put great content on there that's interesting. And I will say that, most people don't go to law firm websites for fun, right? They're going because they're freaking out about something. So put interesting information, but also valuable information so that some of their fears are assuaged when they get to your website. And then they feel like they can trust you to pick up the phone, make an appointment, or email you. So those are the first two steps. You've got branding, you've got website, then you've got content. You cannot just build it and they will come. Your website has got to have consistent content on it. Google rewards websites with consistent content. If you do not have an article coming out every week on your website, other people are beating you online. That is just, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but that is what it is. However, the great news, that's bad news, good news, is that once you get really great content on your website that's like 1,000 words, it's keyworded, right? Now you've got something to say at step 4, which is your social media, right? If you have great content on your website, then you have something to talk about on social media or in your email list, or you can create a podcast out of it, or you can write a small ebook, put a few blog articles together and make an ebook out of it. Once you have content on your website, then you have something to say. And that's the next step, which is social media. You should not be writing articles on LinkedIn. You should not be writing newsletters on LinkedIn because then you are supporting their platform instead of yours. So you always want to get people back to home base, which is your website, your digital real estate. after you have all of that and you are solid on LinkedIn, every lawyer should be on LinkedIn, and it should be you. It should not be your law firm. It should be you, because people do business with people on LinkedIn. And then, if you decide to do Facebook or Instagram, those are great. TikTok, if you are so inclined, but that should be towards the end of your strategy, not the beginning of your strategy. And only if you are exceptionally creative and bored and really, really want to be on TikTok.
I love it. I'm not getting the impression that we need to be on TikTok.
You really don't need to be on TikTok. Now, there are lawyers who are doing well on TikTok. I'm not sure how much that is converting to actual clients, but there are some lawyers out there that are definitely using it in a very influencer kind of way and are not afraid to be very aggressive and abrasive and confrontational and a little edgy on TikTok. So if that is kind of not you, if you're just kind of a high net worth divorce attorney, or if you are an estate planning attorney, that may not be the place for you. The very last thing, after you've done all of this, you've done your branding, website, content, social media, is to consider backlinks. Backlinks are where other websites that are more popular than you, that Google likes better than you, that have a higher domain authority than you, that are more authoritative than you, are linking back to you. The way that's done is you can do this yourself, or you can hire an agency to do it. You always want to make sure it's white hat. You don't want to do anything spammy or creepy, because that will hurt your score overall. But what that is you put content like, the 10 ways to avoid declaring bankruptcy, if you're a bankruptcy attorney or something, the 5 steps to do after you declare bankruptcy. That article goes on a different website and links back to yours. And just one little small tip, anyone that wants to do this themselves for free, there is a website called Haro, Haro, that is Help a Reporter Out. You get 2 emails a day, and a lot of times there will be, listen, it's a lot of emails. I get it. It's like 14 a week, right? And not all of them will have anything that will relate to you, but once in a while, a reporter will be looking for a personal injury attorney or a criminal defense attorney to make a comment or statement about something that is in the news or about a certain new piece of legislation. And then you give that, and then they link back to you. And that's a free way to get backlinks yourself. So that's the strategy.
That is super helpful. And Annette, I'm loving this conversation. And I'm also realizing that I'm taking up a lot of your time. So we have a couple more questions and before we wrap up today, and I'm having a hard time deciding which ones. One question that I have is for the lawyers who are just starting to think about this. What are some of the initial, and I love how you've outlined the 5 steps. I think that's fabulous. For anybody who's just getting started, what are 1 or 2 kind of quick wins that you would recommend just to kind of jump in there?
I think the very first thing is branding, because you have to love what your brand, what your law firm or business looks like on the interwebs. You have to just love it. It's like when you redecorate a room at home and you just are in love with that rug, or you are just in love with that piece of artwork and you can't even stop looking at it. You just love it. You're like, that is me. And when you find the right tagline or the right logo or the right color that really resonates with you, it's so much easier to put it all over social media or your website, because you're like, yes, this is me. This represents how I help people. So I think that's a really quick win. There are ways to create these things yourself for free. Canva is a tool. You don't have to pay for it, and you can create. You have to be a little careful with their licensing if you decide to use some of their images or art that they have. So just be careful with that, because they have some licensing restrictions regarding logos. Or you can pay someone to create a logo for you, or a brand palette. But that is a great quick win. And then the next step, I really believe, is to create a website. And as easy as Wix and Squarespace are to create, I typically recommend against those, because while they are easy to create, technically nothing you put on there is your property. You will have to then eventually move it off to WordPress. And it's like taking a house and digging up the foundation. You see those houses that are going down the street, right? Like that's what it's like. So I would say invest some time, or invest a little bit of money into getting just a bare bones WordPress website. And then I feel like once you have that, you have your digital business card with your logo that you love and your tagline and your colors, and at least just a bare bones website, which you can start to build and, refurbish and redecorate over time. So that would be, I would say, the most effective quick win. There are other quick wins, but these are the ones that would be the most effective.
Beautiful. And Annette, I would love to ask you before we wrap up some of the resources that you offer personally for lawyers who have taken those first steps or who are well into the process and they want to learn more. How do they benefit from your work? How do they learn more about you and potentially also reach out to work with you?
So I think the first step that every lawyer or business, because we work with businesses as well, so you need to sort out where you are in the process. Some people are at the very beginning, and some people are in the middle where they've written some content on their website, and then they're realizing that while they may be a prolific writer or may have a lot of really great ideas, they either don't have the time to do it, or their efforts are going a bit to waste. And they're wasting their time because, frankly, they're not keywording and doing all the SEO formatting correctly. I usually say that submitting something on a website to Google is similar to submitting something to the court. It's got to be in a certain font. It's got to be certain spacing. This page intentionally left blank. So I think that's typically where I meet a lot of law firms, is that they kind of have their branding or they might have their website and they've already put a little bit of content out, but they're just not seeing the results that they need. Or maybe they have that and now they're ready for social media. Or backlink strategy. We work with anyone wherever they're at in the process. And we have actually no packages. Everything is a la carte because I want to make sure to only give the services to law firms or businesses that they need. And we don't have long-term contracts. We don't hold anybody hostage, Paula, we don't do that either. And so we really want to be the sort of kinder, gentler law, digital marketing agency for law firms. And more than anything, we just really want to help educate law firms so that they know where they're at in the process and what their next step should be, whether or not that's to try to do it on their own or whether or not it is now time to probably outsource that.
Beautiful. And Annette, you've got a ton of resources. I think we mentioned them a bit at the beginning, but your own podcast, the Legal Marketing Lounge, where you dive into SEO and the Google things. Like I've looked through and I've listened to some of them. I've looked through the index. And so for anyone who's wanting to have more of the substantive how-to, you've got that on your site. I understand you write weekly articles and you'll have to remind me, where are they found?
So they're on my website, lawquill.com. It's LAWQUILL.com. I have a blog and I practice what I preach. I put out at least 1 or 2 new articles per week. I think that there may be like 150 on there now. So anything that you want to know about, whether or not it's how to get more 5-star reviews for your law firm, what to do if you get a bad review, how to write content, how to do social media, hashtag research, whatever you want. There's a search bar there. So you can search for either written content or podcast content. And then eventually what I did was just write a book, because then people will have an actual guide start to finish that they can work through, over months or years to get to where they need to be online and be successful. So that book probably is the best linear. That is organized very linearly regarding this is what SEO is. Now, here's your first step. So that book can absolutely help. And then, of course, my blog articles and my podcasts can supplement that book. But everything that someone would need would be actually in the book. So
beautiful. Annette, thank you so much. We're going to have to wrap up because we were at time, but I just wanted to thank you again for being here. And I know everyone who tuned in is just loving everything that you had to share, your story of your transition and the how-to in the land of the marketing and the SEO. So thank you so much for joining us today, Annette. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. I really want to encourage any lawyer out there, but especially I think my heart goes to those who are in the middle of their careers, maybe in their 40s or 50s, and have still a desire to pivot into something new, that I just want to encourage them that it can be done successfully. So
I love it. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And
thank you.
Conversation to be continued.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.